So today's session, I would focus on two main things. I would help you understand the role of a business analyst, and we'll also learn what you can expect from this course. Right? So you'll get that broader understanding about what topics we would cover as part of this course. Okay, so those are the two main things that I would cover as part of the course. Okay, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt and ask those questions during the session. Keep it interactive. I don't want it like I talk and then you all be on mute. Right? I prefer it the other way. The more interactive, the more you would learn, I would say. Okay. So before we get into the course outline and today's agenda, let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Raju, and I'm a computer science engineer with an MBA focusing on systems and technology, right? And I've been in this industry for more than 10 years now. A significant part of that working as a business analyst. Okay, and I've been teaching for the past 3 years now, so 3.5 years actually. So the course is pretty much comprehensive from from the industry point of view. Whatever the industry requires, I think we're good there. And yeah, so let me spend some time explaining you the role of a business analyst and what you can learn from this course. Those are two things that I would explain. Right now, if you look at the role of a business analyst, primarily he's the guy who is bridging the gap between the business team and the technical team, right? So he manages the requirements, and he would be the liaison between the various stakeholders, so that everybody has a common understanding about the requirements. Okay, so primarily what his role would be is to understand the requirements from the business team. So he would ensure that all the requirements are clearly understood from the business team, and then document such a way that the technical team can understand it. Right? So there are some frameworks in which you can document the requirements as well. So these two would be the key activities or knowledge areas for a business analyst. So you should understand the various ways in which you can engage the customer to understand the requirements, and you should also know the various techniques to document the requirements. Right. So the end deliverable coming out of this is a document called as a business requirements document. Okay. Now you pretty much own this document. A lot of your time is spent in these two activities. I would say close to 70-80% of your time is spent in understanding requirements and documenting them. Right. Apart from this, you also play a supporting role as in the planning of the project. So you'd help plan for all your requirement related activities. You will help identify new projects and then prepare a business case for it. You will help gain approvals for the budgets and then start the project. You would also manage the communications. So since you are interacting with the various stakeholders, you could also manage the communications. And then finally, you will help in the solution assessment and validation. Or mostly in the industry terms, you will get involved in the testing as well, system testing and user acceptance testing. Right. So these are the 6 knowledge areas which a business analyst need to possess. Right. Now, so this common understanding or this classification of the knowledge areas of a business analyst is done by an organization called IIBA. It's a non-profit organization. It's the one which also offers the CBAP certification. So people would have searched for the business analyst code could have come across this term CBAP, Certified Business Analyst Professional. Right. So that's the one which basically it's something similar to your PMP or some certification which will help you know your credentials, right? But you can take this session only after you have gained some experience. So it's the certification have some minimum requirement of experience. So at this point in time, it might not be relevant for you, but at a later point, once you have gained some experience, then you can look at taking the CBAP certification. Okay, so this is how the course is out. The course is structured. Okay, so let's spend some time understanding what is it that you would learn from this course. Okay, so the initial few sessions, I'll give you an overview about how things work in the industry, because a lot of you guys come from a non-IT background, so you don't really know what kind of roles are there in an IT industry, right? So when a project is started, who are all the key people in the project, right? And what is their role, right? Now, so a lot of times people think that whoever is in the IT industry would do the coding, right? So like us who are business analysts would never do any coding, because we have our role specifically carved out, right? Similarly, testing team has their own test role, the architects have their own role, the programmers have their own role. So you need to be aware of who is doing what, right? So we spent some time gaining that initial understanding how things work in the industry, how a team structured on the client side as well as on the vendor side, and then the phases of the project, right? So a typical project has this planning, requirements, design, development, testing, and then maintain, your go live activities, right? So we'll spend some time understanding these activities in detail, who owns that responsibility for each of those activities, right? So we'll gain that high level view, and we'll also get into the various type of SDLC, software development life cycles. Okay, so that's a few sessions that we would focus on, and uh, that would give you some better understanding about what a business analyst is going to do. Okay, so we would learn how to who are the key people in the project, right? And what is their responsibilities. That's the first thing that you would learn. Then you would help in creating the project plan, right? So you'll provide all the inputs, you'll identify all the activities that you do, prepare the work breakdown structure, identify dependencies, the duration, and uh, uh, and then finally create a project plan, right? So that's one area where you would contribute. While the primary responsibility would be with the project manager, you would still contribute to that activity, and then come up with this project planning, right? So you'd also learn how to manage the scope and requirements for the project, right? So this is one key activity. While we learn that as part of the planning, this is an ongoing activity. So you need to manage the scope and requirements throughout the project. So how do we do that? What are the various techniques like traceability or change management, or your approvals? There are multiple ways in which you can manage the requirements. So you learn all those techniques. You learn how to manage the changes coming in. So you cannot just accept any change which the business team tells you. Why? Because now it will have implications on cost and effort as well. Right? Now, having said that, you cannot even refuse any changes, because changes might be required. So how do we get a balance between these accepting changes outright and rejecting them outright? How do we manage them? So we need to be aware of the change management process. So we learn that as well. So you also need to manage all the risk related to the requirements. So you need to be aware of the risk requirement framework. Okay. So this is what you would learn as part of the requirements planning. Okay. Then once the requirements planning is completed and the project plans are signed off, that's where you would get into your requirement elicitation. So there are 10 ways in which you can engage the customer to understand the requirement. For all we know now, if before taking the course, if I ask you, how do you understand the requirements, you will say, no, I'll go and talk to the SME, right? But that's just one way of understanding the requirements. There are far more effective ways. Like you could conduct workshops, you could have a prototyping session, you could have a reverse engineering session. So there are 10 different ways in which you can engage the customer to understand the requirement. And some of them are far more effective than having that one-on-one discussion with the customer, right? So you would learn those 10 techniques, and then you would learn how to typically approach the requirements for a project, right? What are the frequently used technique, and what are the other techniques which are more effective in a particular context, right? So you learn all those ways in which you can engage the customer to understand the requirements. So we'll also have these case studies wherein we would apply our learning. So whatever we do as part of planning and Elicitation as a case study to a practical situation. So I'll pick up some of the projects that I have done. So I will pick up some real-time case studies and then discuss that, so that we can actually apply our learning to that particular situation, and then see which techniques would I have used to understand requirements, what would the typical plan be, and how would I have managed the scope changes and all, right? Then once you understand the requirements logically, you would also document them. So broadly, these are the 4 ways in which your documentation would go into. Okay, so structured analysis is an outdated technique. It was used earlier, but these days we don't really get into the data flow diagrams. This is an outdated technique. ER diagrams are still used to model your databases, so this is still relevant. And then object-oriented analysis is the most popular way. We use use cases for capturing the requirements, which are based on UML. So all your functional requirements in object-oriented projects is done using use cases. Okay, so what is use case, what is UML, what is object-oriented? We'll learn that in detail. Okay, we'll get that clarity. Then we'd also these days a lot of projects are getting done in this agile way of managing the projects, right? So there are these Scrum based projects which are executed, and they work in a completely different style, right? So there is no BRD, or there's no detail, you don't really waste a lot of time on all these bureaucratic and non-productive activities, I would say, right? So in those kind of situations, we would use user stories for capturing the requirements, right? So if you look at the industry currently, these 2 are the most widely used ones: use cases and user stories for capturing your requirement. We'll learn that in very much detail, and you'll become an expert in writing use cases or user stories, depending on the type of project that you're executing. If it's a typical SDLC project, it would be object-oriented and user stories. If it's an agile way, it would be a Scrum model, and it would be user stories. Okay, use cases and user stories.
Yeah,
Yep.
sorry to interrupt you. I wanted to ask a question. Like, generally when you join a project, you become a part of change control. Mostly, like, I've seen whatever
Right.
I know of. So, like,
Yeah.
when you do the change control, then also you go in for user stories, or because, most of the companies, they are moving from like waterfall or other methodologies to agile now. So they
Yes.
already have their existing VRDs or something like that. So do you, like when the change control happens, then you use the user stories or you use the VRDs?
Okay, I'll give you a context. Now, change control is basically a team, right? Now,
Yeah.
uh, see, there are 2 or 3 teams which you can actually join as a business analyst. Now, you could directly join a client, right? Or you could join a vendor, right? So, client could be somebody like let's say a Citibank, right? Or a vendor is somebody like an Accenture, right? So, it's an IT company. We call that as a vendors, and clients we call that as a organization which are picking up this work, right? Now you could join either one of these organizations, right? So typically projects could be outsourced end to end, which means they are saying that right from the requirements till the testing, I'll outsource it to a vendor. So let's say an Accenture or IBM or a TCS or whatever it is, right? Or in some cases they would keep the requirements activities to themselves and then say, I'll capture the requirements, only the design and development I'll outsource it. I'll also do the testing, right?
Yeah.
So in some situations the business analyst would be here, he would be capturing the requirements, but he's still part of the client location, right? Now This is one situation and this is another situation. Coming over to your questions, change management typically would be part of these teams, right? So that it would be part of the client location, and you would get involved in those, the requirements. Okay. Now the team is called change management, but we'd also manage the requirements and all, right? So that generally the term. So some organizations use that term, change management team, but that doesn't just restrict it to only the changes, right? So even any new projects which come up, the requirements you'll still take up, right? And then there would be some existing systems which need some upgrades, right? So you want to enhance the functionality, right? So those also will be taken as change request. Okay. So primarily it's a block of work which is coming to you. It could as a new project or it could come in as a enhancements to the existing system. Okay. Yeah. All that work would come to the change management system, to the change management teams. Now, how do you analyze the requirement? How do you execute? How do you document it? And how do you execute it? Could be done in these different ways. It could be done in object-oriented way. It could be done in an agile way, right? Mm-hmm. If it's done in an object-oriented way, you would use cases to capture the requirement, right? Mm-hmm. If it's done in an agile way, you would use the user stories to capture the requirements, right? So depending on the methodology in which the project is executed, right? So the way you document the requirements would differ.
Mm-hmm. So like, the methodology, whatever the company is following, we will do the requirement accordingly.
Yeah, and it's not a company is following a methodology. It depends on the project type, right? So for some projects, you would use object-oriented and then execute in use cases. Some projects you would do it in user stories, right?
My question was, the pre-existing version, like, the pre-existing requirement was done as a BRD, like, as a document. Right. But then the company moves from, like, from one methodology.
That is where I was giving this context. So project work could come in as enhancements to existing system, or it could come in as a completely new project. So for either of this, you'd still, capture them using use cases or user stories.
Okay.
So it's not like, only the enhancements you'll go through user stories, or new projects will do it using BRD and use cases. That's not the way, right? Okay. So whatever requirement comes to us, it could come in as a new project or an enhancements. Either way, we could do it using use cases or user stories.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think you'll get a lot more clarity once you get into what a use case is. Once we start understanding these various ways in documenting the requirements, you'll get that clarity. Okay. So for now, I'm just listing them down here. But this is where actually we spend a lot of time in the course. Close to 10, 12 sessions or more than that would be in figuring out the way in which you would document these requirements. Okay. Communication is a small session, not even an hour session, I would say. Basically lists down the best practices of how do you manage the requirements communication, preparing the plan, managing conflicts, identifying those overall formats. All that would come under the requirements communication. Okay. You also get involved in testing sometimes, right? So I've ensured that this course is comprehensive. You picked up, in some cases maybe you'll not get involved. In some cases you'll get involved, right? So we'll anyway learn where would we contribute into this overall testing, how to create a test plan, how to create the test cases, how to execute them, how to analyze defects and then provide those inputs to the testing team. Yes. So as part of the testing, we'll learn about integration testing and user acceptance testing. What is the scope of activities of these and the various phases of this testing. So we'll get that broad big picture about testing and from a functional point of view, right? So you're not going to get involved in all those performance testing, security testing and all that. It would be purely from a requirement side, since you are the BA and you understand only the functionality. You could get involved only in the functional aspect of testing, right? Then another activity where you guys analysis.
Will you be giving us like some detailed knowledge upon the various softwares that are being used nowadays for testing?
For testing, we'll primarily focus on the process. Right? Because see, for functional testing, I don't think people use any tools. It's all for automation testing or performance testing. That is where your tool-based knowledge would come, right? And we are not looking at a pure QA kind of work, right? So, as a business analyst, what is it that you could be asked to contribute during the testing phase?
Yeah, but generally in interviews they ask you like like what all tools we have used for testing.
Right.
So
So that would be primarily for for tracking your two bugs. Right. So when some defect is identified, right. So you need some tool to where you can upload the defect and assign it to somebody. Right. So that's the kind of thing which would be there for functional testing. Right.
okay.
So because the rest of them, like how do you automate the testing process? How do you test the performance of a particular application? So those are all very tool intensive. Now here we are just looking at some frame or some platform which will help us manage the defects. So there are some tools like Bugzilla, then you have Rally, right? So then you have so some tools which will help us to manage this defect management process, right? So I'll give you that brief overview. If required, how to use that from a functional point of view. It should not be a big deal, right? So I'll cover that. There are a lot of YouTube videos. I'll suggest that you can go through that. Once you understand the process, getting that tool specific knowledge becomes very easy for you.
Okay.
So we'll cover that. So maybe if that's an additional request coming, I can cover that. Should not be a big deal, I would say. Yeah. So the last topic, or rather, this is actually the first step in the overall value chain of a project, right? Now, how do you identify new projects, opportunities, and how do you assess them? How do you figure out whether this project is profitable or not? Whether you should take up this project or not? Should I invest in a new CRM or should I invest in a new application, new mobile app, right? Or maybe in an analytics project? Where should I keep my money, or where should I invest my money to build projects? Right? So all those decisions would be part of this enterprise analysis. Right, so you'll do those due diligence, you'll prepare the business case document, and finally update your business architecture as well. Right. Now this is something which you as a business analyst is expected to do. Once a business case is approved, that's where your planning would start. Right, so that's again where we have started. But ideally, this is the first step. I cover this at the end of it because it's a little complicated, and you'll be in a much better position to understand this at the end of it rather than at the start. Right, that's the only reason I've put it at the end. There are a lot of miscellaneous topics that we would cover, like maybe a session on SQL, a session on Visio, a session on Rally, right? A lot of topics related to the core topics that we cover. We'll cover that under this miscellaneous. I mean, they would be part of the each topic itself. I'm not listed down there because I don't want to digress from the core topics, right? But you'd spend a lot of time learning other stuff as well, which isn't listed in this course content. Okay, like I said, the course is for people who don't really have much experience working as a business analyst. Now we are not offering this course for clearing the certification, while the course is aligned to that certification. Right? To take a certification, you are expected to work as a business analyst for a few years. Right? Now that prerequisites I don't assume is for this particular course. So absolutely nothing. You don't really need to know anything about how the industry works, IT industry works, or the role of a business analyst to join this course. I assume that you don't have any prior knowledge and then start from there. So it's well suited for people who are fresh out of college or from other industries or people from a technical role also can join this course. Okay. Training material is well organized. You'll get access to this portal, which will be the one-stop shop for all your training needs. Right? So you'll get access to the training material. So all the presentations that we would use, on a day-to-day basis, right? So all those will be uploaded for you for your future reference. Then you have some additional reading material which you can read through to gain some better understanding of all the tools that we would and there would be a lot of templates as well that which are expected as deliverables from a business analyst, right? So we'll cover each of these templates in detail. So we'll clearly understand what is it that we are expected to do, contribute as a business analyst for each of these documents, right? All the daily recordings which we would cover would be uploaded into this portal. So at any point in time, you can just log in into this portal and then view the recording of any of the sessions. And it's also available on the mobile. So, it's always available for you on the go. At any point in time you want to refer to any of those previous topics that we have covered, you can just refer to this link and then listen to these recordings, right? All the sessions, when your batch starts, I'll upload it into this particular folder and you'll have access to that particular batch folder. All your recordings will be uploaded onto that. And then there will be a lot of additional reference links that you will get, wherein you can keep your knowledge up to date and track these links to gain additional knowledge. There would be a discussion board wherein you can upload your assignments that I would give as part of the course, or if you have any questions, even at a later point, once you've completed the course as well, you can upload your questions here. I'd be glad to answer them. It acts as a knowledge sharing forum for all you guys. So all the students who have taken this course, they can visit this at a later point as well. Yeah, so that's primarily is what I had to cover.